In fact, if this were true, we would have to throw away a substantial part of the Bible. Speaking out against immoral or unjust actions of political leaders has been the burden of prophets and disciples of God from time immemorial. It was for this very reason that many of them were persecuted. Some of them were stoned, some of them were burned, many were imprisoned. Nevertheless, it was their God-given task as watchmen on the towers to speak up. It is certainly no different today. To Moses, God said, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, unto all the inhabitants thereof." Why? For God knows full well that the gospel, his plan for the blessing of his children, can prosper only in an atmosphere of freedom. To modern men, God has said, the Constitution should be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh. At this particular moment in history, the United States Constitution is definitely threatened, and every citizen should know about it. The warning of this hour should resound through the corridors of every American institution, schools, churches, the halls of Congress, press, radio, and TV. And so far as I am concerned, and I'm sure so far as you are concerned, it will resound with God's help. Our republic and its Constitution are being destroyed while the enemies of freedom are being aided. How? In at least 10 ways. First, by diplomatic recognition and aid, trade, and negotiations with the communists. Two, by disarmament of our military defenses. Three, by destruction of our security laws and the promotion of atheism by decisions of the Supreme Court. Four, by loss of sovereignty and solvency through international commitments and membership in world organizations. Five, by undermining of local law enforcement agencies and congressional investigating committees. Six, by usurpations by the executive and judicial branches of our federal government. Seven, by lawlessness in the name of civil rights. Eight, by a staggering national debt with inflation and a corruption of the currency. Nine, by a multiplicity of executive orders and federal programs which greatly weaken local and state governments. And 10, by the sacrificing of American manhood by engaging in wars we apparently have no intention of winning. Wherever possible, I have tried to speak out. It is for this very reason that certain people in Washington have bitterly criticized me. They don't want people to hear the message. It embarrasses them. The things which are destroying the Constitution are the things they have been voting for. They are afraid of their political careers if these facts are pointed out. They therefore try to silence any who carry the message. Anyone who will stand up and be counted. By 1962, these American liberals had almost completely neutralized the resurgence of American patriotism. They had frightened uninformed citizens away from study groups and patriotic rallies. They had made it popular to call patriotism a controversial subject, which should not be discussed in school assemblies or churches. From Washington, D.C., the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, issued an edict to radio and television stations that if they allowed the controversial subjects of Americanism, anti-communism, or states' rights to be discussed on their stations, they would be required to give equal time free of charge to anyone wishing to present an opposite view. Can you imagine this happening in a free country? I said to my family, it is fantastic that anything like this could have happened in America. Now, we should all be opposed to socialistic communism, for it is our mortal and spiritual enemy, the greatest evil in the world today. But the reason many liberals don't want the American people to form study groups, to really understand and then fight socialistic communism, is that once the American people get the facts, they will begin to realize that much of what these liberals advocate is actually helping the enemy. The liberals hope you'll believe them when they tell you how anti-communist they are. But they become alarmed if you really inform yourself on the subject of socialistic communism. For after you inform yourself, you might begin to study the liberal voting record. And this study would show you how much the liberals are giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and how much the liberals are actually leading America towards socialism itself. For communism is just another form of socialism, as is fascism. So now you can see the picture. These liberals want you to know how much they are doing for you, with your tax money, of course, but they don't want you to realize that the path they are pursuing is socialistic, and that socialism is the same as communism in its ultimate effect on our liberties. When you point this out, they want to shut you up. They accuse you of maligning them, of casting aspersions, of being political. No matter whether they label their bottle as liberalism, progressivism, or social reform, I know the contents of the bottle is poison to this republic, and I'm going to call it poison. We do not need to question the motive of these liberals. They could be most sincere. But sincerity, or supposed benevolence, or even cleverness is not the question. The question is, are we going to save this country from the hands of the enemy and the deceived? As J. Edgar Hoover said, a tragedy of the past generation in the United States is that so many persons, including high-ranking statesmen, public officials, educators, ministers of the gospel, professional men, have been duped into helping communism. Communist leaders have proclaimed that communism must be partly built with non-communist hands. And this, to a large extent, is true. We cannot defeat communism with socialism, nor with secularism, nor with pacifism, nor with appeasement or accommodation. We can only defeat communism with true Americanism, unquote. So from the very beginning of this Moscow campaign to stop the anti-communist movement in this country, it was an important part of the communist strategy to get their liberal American friends to carry out an attack against patriotic organizations. Of course, the communists have learned not to attack all patriotic groups at once. Their strategy is to focus on just one organization and make it so detestable and ugly in the public mind that they can hold it up as a sort of tar baby and then use it to smear all other individuals or groups in the same category. It was interesting to see just where the communists would begin their dirty work. Which organization would be singled out to get the tar brush treatment? It could have been the American Farm Bureau, which the communists have consistently denounced. It could have been the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the DAR, the Sons of the American Revolution. These have been favorite communist targets in the past, as had J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. As it turned out, it was none of these. Instead, the communists chose to focus their attack on a fairly new organization, which very few people had heard about, including myself. They decided to level practically their entire arsenal on the John Birch Society. For the non-political Birch Society had within it both the policy, the program, and the personnel to help defeat the conspiracy in this country. And the communists knew it, for they had seen its results. On February 25th, 1961, the official communist paper in California, the People's World, came out with the opening blast. It said there is a new, secret, fascist society which is setting up cells all over the United States. They said it was the most serious threat to the American way of life. That was the signal for the bloc of American liberals to take up the torch, and they did. Overnight, the patriotic campaign against communism was almost completely forgotten as the liberal vigilantes heroically rode out in full force to save the country from the terrible Birchers. Not only the ultra-liberal forces rallied to the battle, but some of the most respected conservative press took up the hue and cry, and many prominent, highly respected Americans also fell for the deceptive line. The communists had intended to confuse the American people, and they did. The tar brush tactics smeared the image of the new, small, but rapidly growing John Birch Society to the point where many people thought it must be a group of neo-Nazis or a revival of the Ku Klux Klan. Some prominent, highly respected men who were so deceived that they declared that the infiltration of the John Birch Society was equally as bad as the infiltration of the godless communist conspiracy. From the beginning of this attack, the John Birch Society pleaded for some kind of official investigation so the truth about them could be given to the public. They believed this was the only way they could counteract the tidal wave of false propaganda which was being heaped upon them. But the investigation was so long in coming that the purposes of the Communist Liberal Coalition were completely accomplished. It will probably be a long time before the official report on the John Birch Society gets an honest hearing. This investigation was conducted by trained investigators who were working for the California Senate Fact-Finding Committee on Un-American Activities. The investigation took 2 years. Sworn affidavits were obtained from scores of people. The attacks on the society were studied. Interviews were conducted with detractors and supporters of the society. Undetected investigators attended Birch meetings. The Senate fact-finding report was issued in June 1963. But even this report was recklessly distorted by some of the liberal press stories. I therefore obtained a copy of the report myself so I could see what was in it. The report is 62 pages long, was signed by all members of the committee, and was issued by the President pro tem of the California Senate, Senator Hugh M. Burns, a Democrat. Here are a few quotes from the report. The society had been publicly charged with being a secret, fascist, subversive, un-American, anti-Semitic organization. We have not found any of these accusations to be supported by the evidence.